Welcome to Sabbath School Daily, where we have been studying from this lesson, Psalms. This week we're studying from lesson number 10, which has the title Lessons from the Past, and today is Sunday's lesson, which has the title The Lord's Unstoppable Faithfulness. Today's lesson revolves around Psalm 78, which holds several historical instances in the life of the children of Israel in order for the reader to learn more. Asaph, who is the psalmist here in this case, he wrote this psalm. He is drawing from three main historical periods or three main moments that he wants his readers, his listeners, to learn from. He describes this psalm as a parable. You'll see that in chapter 78, verse 2, that says, I will open my mouth in a parable, I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. So that's verse 2 and 3. And so what he's doing is he's opening up understanding of ancient stories, the things that have happened in the past. The lesson opens today by saying this: the reviews of Israel's past highlights God's faithfulness and Israel's unfaithfulness. They also should teach coming generations not to repeat their ancestors' mistakes, but to trust God and to remain faithful to his covenant. The psalmist uses history as a parable, which means that the people should deeply ponder the psalm's message and search for the meaning for themselves. Psalm 78 verse 2 is a prophetic description of Jesus' method of teaching in parables. So not only is this psalm a parable, but it's indicating the future way in which the Messiah would mainly teach his messages and stories through the use of parables. The lesson then continues. The psalm also reflects on the time of the Exodus, the settlement in Canaan, and the time of David. So those are the three different eras in which the psalm reflects upon so that we can learn from it. It's, again, the Exodus, the settlement in Canaan, and the time of David. It then goes on to say, it demonstrates the Lord's glorious deeds and the consequences of the people's breaking of their covenant with God. Israel's history recounts many forms of the people's disloyalty to God, especially their idolatry. Remember how we talked about the covenant last week, where God extends his hand to establish a berit, a covenant, with several different people in several different moments. With Adam, with Noah, with Abraham, with Isaac and Jacob, with the children of Israel, with their kings, with their prophets. We'll see that God is constantly wanting to fix this problem of sin. But the problem is that the human counterpart is never able to firmly latch onto God's arm and not break the covenant that God is establishing. The problem has never been from God's side. It's always been from the human side. But finally, Jesus did come from the human side, and he latched onto the arm of God, providing a way for us to then take hold of God's covenant. And that is the covenant provided to us by Jesus in what he did in his life, his ministry, his death, his resurrection, and his intercession for us today in the heavenly sanctuary. The lesson goes on to say that the psalmist, however, stresses the root of the Israelites' unfaithfulness. They forgot what God had done for them, did not trust God, put God to the test, rebelled against him, and failed to keep his law, his covenant, and his testimonies. By stressing the specific forms of disloyalty, the psalmist implies that the rejection of Israel in history has resulted from one core sin, namely the people's failure to trust the Lord. Look, this is an ancient text, but it's so relevant to us today. It's in a way so modern because we're tempted with the same things. To forget God, we're tempted to rebel against him, and we're tempted not to trust him. I mean, how many times do we go about our life trying to solve our own problems only to come to the end of the day and remember that we forgot to pray, to include God in what we go through? And look, that's in the best cases where we're actually forgetting about it, which we shouldn't. But what about the moments where we actively rebel? When we know one thing, we know what we should be doing, but then we go off to the other side and we practice what the Bible calls of the sin of the upheld fist. As though we have our fist held up to God saying, I know what you want, but I want to do it my way. Right? Doing it our way is what the Israelites were doing. And that's what we're trying to learn here with this text not to do. Not going our own way. Not doing what we want to do, but submitting our lives to God who knows what's best, who will ensure that if we follow him, perhaps not the most comfortable immediate outcome will happen, but the right outcome will happen. God will never tempt us, friends, with more than we can bear. The Bible makes that clear. And so the lesson then continues by saying, when reading the psalm, one is overwhelmed with the people's constant stubbornness and spiritual blindness in contrast to the Lord's boundless patience and grace. How was each new generation so slow to learn? Have you ever read the stories of the Old Testament, even in the New Testament, where you see that God is constantly revealing his will, constantly revealing what he wants for them, but the people are just stubborn. They either don't want to listen, or when they do listen, they just do the wrong thing. The human heart and mind is stubborn. We are hard-headed and hard-hearted. And so Part of this whole journey of life is learning how to let God sit upon the throne of our heart and allowing that old man and that old woman to stay up on the cross. You see, in the heart of every man, woman, and child, there is a throne and a cross. And either Jesus sits upon the throne and the old man and woman on the cross, or the old man or woman will sit upon the throne and they will put Jesus on the cross. Our constant prayer should be, Lord, please sit on the throne and allow me to crucify myself daily. That's what we have to learn with these stories, to allow the Lord to mold us. And while it might not always be comfortable, as I've already stated, God's way is always the best way. That's the lesson to be learned. Finally, the lesson concludes by saying, before we get overly judgmental of past generations, we should consider ourselves. Aren't we also forgetful of God's past wonders and neglectful of his covenantal requirements? The psalm does not encourage people to rely on their own deeds. Instead, Psalm 78 shows the futility of human will unless it is grounded in constant awareness of God's faithfulness and acceptance of his grace. The unsuccessful battles of God's people elucidate the psalm's lesson that human efforts apart from faithfulness to God are doomed to end in failure. So the lesson here is that while we read scripture, it has to resonate with us. Of course, there's an immediate context here. And that's the first thing that we have to learn when studying the Bible is how to ask the right questions of scripture. Who is writing this? Why is he writing it? To whom is he writing it? Where is he writing it? How is he writing it? All of these questions, right, that come from biblical exegesis, which simply means the extraction of meaning, right? Who, what, where, when, why, how. These are questions to ask of the text. But after we do that, we then need to apply it. How does the text transcend its immediate context and apply to our life as well? Now remember that, because some people do the contrary first. They first want to apply it to their own life and leave the immediate context to only later. That is a wrong way to read the Bible, and that's a real easy way to interpret things wrongly, to misinterpret things. So first ask questions of the text, what's going on, who's writing it, why is he writing it, to whom is he writing it, and then apply it to your own life. So as you read this text, Psalm 78, remember to do that. Ask the appropriate questions of the text, and then apply it to your own life and to the life of your family. Please remember to study your lesson, read Psalm 78, which is what today's lesson is all about. Also remember to comment down below. I love hearing from you, and please remember to like, to share, and to subscribe to our videos. We release one every day, and I hope to see you again here tomorrow for another Sabbath School Daily.